position of the Scottish Government in relation to car usage. I'm conscious that in 2020 there was an ambition to reduce car kilometres travelled by 20%, and that this year there was a renewed policy statement in partnership with COSLA, which still wishes to tackle car usage but had no specific target within it. That might be perhaps a reflection on the Climate Change Committee advice that we got this year that modelled a required reduction in car usage for carbon budgets of 6% by 2035, which is very different from the 2020 target. So it would be helpful for the committee to understand what the Scottish Government's current ambition is in relation to reduction in car usage.
So the original target of this 20% of car use reduction by 2030 was set at a time actually around the pandemic when there was a substantial reduction in car use, and there wasn't an anticipation it would come back to previous levels. As you may recall, I took quite a bit of flack for recognising in the I think it was in the summer period that this is one, not achievable, but also may not be needed and what is going to be required in the future. Now, of course, the reason I had to make that clear at that time, because Audit Scotland had done a report at that point, what I think we all knew was that the Climate Change Committee's advice was going to be quite way off what we were expecting was going to be needed when those original targets were set. So the fact that the UK Climate Change Committee, in its recent advice, Scotland's carbon budgets, indicates that Scotland would now need that 6% modal shift from car to public transport and active travel by 2035, as you've stated, is a big difference from what was there originally. So one of the things that I'm currently doing is revising what we are going to be producing. We'll need to do that as part of the climate change plan. I know this committee has spent a lot of time looking at what might be anticipated from that. One of the things we'll need to look at is whether it's, and I've got a submission that I'm ready to look at any time now on the basis that we're obviously preparing for the climate change publication. We need to look at whether it's car use or indeed car emission reduction, because obviously what we're trying to do with car use reduction is reduce emissions. So we'll look at what's the appropriate measure. And clearly, one of the issues that we had previously was obviously with, again, going back to this partnership aspect, COSLA are really key in this, and we're not anticipating all parts of the country being able to do the same level and degree of change. Our cities will be in advance perhaps of other areas. We will always need car use in rural areas. I've been quite clear as a Transport Secretary that I anticipate that. Where I think there is a bit of a challenge is the Climate Change Committee's view is that there'll be limited car use reduction because effectively people will just move from petrol, diesel to EVs, and it will just, in terms of there'll be limited reduction in cars full stop, but most of them, in fact all of them, will be EVs. I think that's ambitious. I think we're going to have to consider what we will need to do to meet our carbon budgets. So I think the 6% is one low, but also I think in terms of the measure, the emissions, we need to think about how it impacts on emissions. But there are other reasons why we'd want to encourage car use reduction generally by encouraging public transport use. And also we know that that's actually a healthier way in terms of walking, wheeling, cycling to use public transport as well. In some part of the country, quite clearly, we need to have a continuing extensive car use, and that can be EV, but as we're very aware that we need to make sure that we've got the charging infrastructure that meets the requirement, which is why, as I've said to the committee before, we've got the £30 million out with local authorities to develop that, and also that new additional rural and islands EV fund, because the market won't necessarily support charging structure in some of our rural and island areas. So it is difficult, it's complex. There's a world of difference from what the Climate Change Committee are now saying compared to previously, and what I will need to do is make sure that we present to everyone in terms of the climate change plan what that new target's going to be.
Of course, Cabinet Secretary will get more information when the climate change plan is published on a kind of sectoral basis across portfolio, but I'm conscious that 6% reduction, if I've got this right, predicated by the UK Climate Change Committee is a 6% reduction in anticipated growth in car usage rather than a reduction in kilometres. I'm just wondering at this stage, would you position to say whether or not the Scottish Government's position would be to see less kilometres travelled by car, or constraining the growth in kilometres travelled in cars. But I'm conscious you also mentioned it's about reducing emissions as much as about kilometres.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the point is about emissions, and you could have the same number of cars and increase car use. If they're all EVs, you can see an increase in terms of the use of cars, but a reduction in the use of emissions. Now, I think we need to ensure that whatever is produced in our plans reflect what Scotland's needs are likely to be, and I do still think that we need a shift and an encouragement of use of public transport, which is one of the reasons why we have removed the peak fares for good, because it'll take it'll take some time to deliver that full modal shift and people making that decision. So in terms of what's required, we'll set that out in the climate change plan. We indicated in the June statement at the time of the extract from the policy statement accompanying the carbon budgets in June, some of the areas that we'd be working on in terms of the transport aspect. So you'll have the transport chapter of the plan when it's published.
Okay, so it's kind of wait and see whether it's less kilometres or not. We'll have to wait for the climate change plan to
I am actively in consideration of what that will look like. I'm not in a position to tell the committee just now, but it'll be set out in the
more generally then, my final question would be, you mentioned, which was quite helpful, that there's an appreciation that remote and rural areas, cars are an absolute lifeline and necessity for many reasons, even with enhanced public transport in those areas. So should we expect any constraints in the growth of car usage to be more predominant within our urban areas? And could you give some examples of what current actions the Scottish Government is taking, notwithstanding the new plan that will be published shortly, I would imagine, to reduce car usage or to switch to public transport?
So when I made it clear that we're going to have to change our targets in this area, what we did do was, again, together with COSLA, set out a policy statement of the different actions that we've taken place. One of the proposals in that, and I think it's the right and appropriate one, is that there would be regional transport partnerships, and on a local basis will set out what they'll be doing to try and help tackle emissions and obviously car use as well, and to encourage public transport. We also said that we would have a regulatory check on what was the Labour legislation on road user charging. That's up to local authorities if they want to use that or not. And we're establishing a group that will look at whether that legislation is still fit for purpose if MD wanted to use it. And that would be the regulatory check aspect of the then Transport, I think, 2001 legislation.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Bob. Back to you, Mark, for some more questions.
Yeah, so just to continue in that vein, in terms of the plans that you would expect local authorities to come up with, particularly the urban local authorities, where they're obviously going to need to try and have a target in mind for traffic reduction. What kind of measures would you support? I mean, would you support traffic demand management measures within that? If a council came forward with some form of congestion charging or workplace parking, would that be something that, if a council came to Scottish Government and said, we want to do this, can you support us? Can you help us explain the benefits of this? Can you help us with the modelling of it? What would be the response from the Scottish Government on that? So
again, this is local decision making, and I'm not going to do a command and control to say what they should or shouldn't do. It would be up to them to decide what they want to do. Obviously, they've got legislative provision, whether it's in the transport legislation from 2001 or indeed the 2019 legislation, although I think it's interesting that maybe it is because of what's obviously happened in terms of fewer people coming into the cities to work in terms of commuting, and that's reflecting perhaps Monica Lennon's point about in terms of commuting use. If we're still seeing significant numbers, and in fact the census information was quite interesting about the levels there, about a third of people still working from home, and again that was obviously taken in 2022, that obviously the changes for workplace levy, for example, those circumstances have changed, and we don't see any local authorities looking at that.